And those U.S. midterms are only a few days away. It's the first major election since the Capitol riots, and it takes place amid feverish tensions in the U.S. In recent years, threats of violence against those running for or holding public office have become commonplace, and attacks against lawmakers have increased dramatically. The recent assault on the husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has put the threat of violence ahead of next week's vote in sharp focus.
On October 28th, an attack in the San Francisco home of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi left her husband with a fractured skull. The attacker brought zip ties and duct tape and is now charged with attempted murder.
Mr. DePape specifically targeted the Pelosi home to confront Speaker Pelosi. This was politically motivated.
Threats against lawmakers are at an all-time high. In 2021 alone, Capitol Police investigated 9,625 threats made against members of Congress. The White House is alarmed.
We must, with one overwhelming, unified voice, speak as a country and say there's no place for voter intimidation or political violence in America.
I am fearful that these stop-the-steal conspiracies will push some people over the edge into violence.
In Mannheim, Pennsylvania, this is a Reawaken America rally. The spirit of Donald Trump is everywhere. The event organizer, his former national security advisor, General Michael Flynn. Flynn has become a celebrity in far-right circles with anti-government groups, white supremacists, and with the Christian nationalist flock. He's a staunch supporter of Donald Trump and the former president's big lie of a stolen election. The attendees are mostly white conservative Christians or self-declared Christian nationalists. The crowd is easily riled up.
And I am here to declare war on every race-baiting Democrat and evil scheme that comes from the gates of hell.
Reawaken America events are safe spaces and echo chambers for far-right speakers to spread and deepen fears that the current government is literally evil.
I love what I hear all the time.
Most of the people here kind of see what's happening, and they're supporting everybody that's, all the speakers.
When people feel that they're on the side of righteousness or that God is actually sanctioning their positions, it gives people more confidence in becoming even more angry and getting more involved.
At a campaign stop of Republican State Senator Doug Mastriano, he wants to become the next governor of Pennsylvania. Mastriano, a declared 2020 election denier, wants to make America a Christian nation. Here, he is at a campaign stop in April.
November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so.
What that means in detail, he never explains, and nobody in the crowd ever asks. Instead,
I wholeheartedly, vote for him.
We got to take our country back. We're a godless country.
As extreme political and religious views are seeping into the mainstream, many people here and across the U.S. feel their country is falling apart, that they are under attack, and they speak of a cold civil war in America.
And I can now speak about all of this with Jennifer Dresden of the nonpartisan group Protect Democracy. Ms. Dresden, welcome to the day. How much has the false claim that Donald Trump was cheated out of victory 2 years ago sharpened the polarization of U.S. politics?
Thanks very much for having me. It has certainly had an impact. But one thing that I want to really highlight is that polarization in the United States has actually been increasing for about 30 years. So it would be a mistake to see this as something sort of new that came from nowhere. It is certainly has heightened the volume and the intensity of the public discussion around this and how we understand and see that polarization. But it's also happening in a broader context.
Certain politicians have, though, found a way to tap into this polarization and give it a boost, haven't they? Going into these midterms now, where do you see the roots of the biggest threat of political violence?
So one of the things that we've seen here is that these threats don't all take the same form, and they don't all find their way to the same targets, as it were. So the first thing that I think is really important to highlight is that actual episodes of physical violence are still quite rare in the United States. They've been on the increase. They are a source of deep concern, but they are not pervasive. What we have also seen a lot more of, though, is threats and intimidation. And these have definitely been on the rise. We've seen them increasing against members of Congress. We've also seen them increasing against election officials. For example, sort of your local level election administrators even have been receiving a lot more threats and harassment. And that's something that's really concerning because we depend on these people for our system to function, right? Somebody needs to run elections and do so in a way that is rooted in professionalism and experience. And so we're seeing that type of activity happen, as well as disproportionate threats against women and persons of color as well.
How have these developments reshaped the political landscape? Because I can imagine that there are many people who are attracted to public service but don't want to be exposed to that kind of threat and harassment and potentially even, attacks.
Yes, it has had an impact. Over the last couple of years, we have seen a rise in the number of election officials, local officials who have resigned because of this. But we've also seen a response. We've seen a response from civil society. We've seen a response, a growing response from law enforcement to try and take proactive steps to help offer local officials, local election officials, some amount of protection and security. And so there has definitely been an impact, especially at the local level. But we have also seen responses that I find encouraging in that regard.
We just heard it in the report there. Many people see these political debates as an existential battle between good and evil. How do you think we got here? This has been brewing for decades, you say, but now we're at a point where the result of an election is such an emotionally charged and visceral matter.
It is. I wish there were one simple, straightforward explanation that I could point to explain how we got to this point. Unfortunately, there's not a single explanation that experts and researchers agree on. What we do know is that the type of polarization has shifted in recent decades. So we've gone from people having lots of disagreement about policy issues to a more sort of negative partisanship, where it becomes a question of whether people have negative views about people who have different political affiliation than they do. That has contributed. We've also seen shifts in the economy, sort of the effects of globalization. We've seen shifts in basic social structures and basic cultural changes, as well as some backlash to some of the demographic changes that we've seen and some of the advances that we've made in terms of trying to better fulfill the promise of America for everyone.
According to a recent poll, about 1 in 3 Americans say they believe violence against the government can sometimes be justified. Is violence becoming more socially acceptable in a way in the United States?
Well, just to lay it out there, violence is never acceptable in a democratic system. It has no place in democracy. What we've been seeing is an increase in the number of people who respond to surveys saying that they do believe that in some situations, under some circumstances, violence may be justified. I would highlight that what exactly people mean by that when they respond to those surveys varies. So we have seen an upward trend in the numbers. But I would also just note that it's worth looking at that polling quite carefully. There are a number of these surveys, and the way they ask the questions does vary. So what people mean by that is not always what you might assume that they mean.
Yeah. You are with a group called Protect Democracy. We don't have much time, about 40 seconds, but what can be done to protect democracy in the U.S.?
A number of things. So just to put it briefly, the threat to democracy in the United States, as in other countries around the world that are facing an authoritarian threat, is occurring across a number of different sectors. There are 7 different tactics, we might say, that would-be authoritarians use to degrade democracy over time. And there are ways to respond to each of those. So when it comes to political violence in particular, there are things that can be done. Increasing partnerships with law enforcement, for example, can help protect local officials. We know from all of the research that the way that political leaders respond to violence is really important. Responsible rhetoric, using messages to their followers that de-escalate the situation and call for peace, can be very powerful. And then, of course, the way that individuals engage with their communities
We're running
and
out
with
of
politics.
time. I would love to let you finish, but we're at the end of the show. Thank you so much for your time. Jennifer Dresden of Protect Democracy.